He slid the pen across the kitchen table, the way some men say grace. Slow, certain, like the answer was already written before anyone sat down. Sign it, Naomi. Family doesn't clock out. 11 years I had kept the books for my father's shop and never once cashed a paycheck. Here is what he did not know. That morning, my name was already on 3 loans in that house, and I had never signed a single one of them. I walked out the side door with 1 duffel bag, my 6-year-old's hand in mine, and a green cloth notebook that would turn out to be worth more than the house they were fighting over. Today I catch forgers for a living. I am a certified fraud examiner. That means I read the lie inside a ledger, the way you read a face across a table. Last winter, I finally read the signatures they had faked in my name. Then I made every stolen dollar walk itself back to the 2 men who had actually signed. My name is Naomi Reyes. I am 34 years old. If you have ever been the one your family leaned on for everything and counted for nothing, stay with me, because the most ordinary thing in that house, a notebook full of my mother's careful handwriting, was about to become the thing that set me free. Drop the word steady in the comments, if you were the steady one too. I know exactly what it cost you. Now, let me tell you how the quietest woman in that family became the one thing they could not explain away. To understand how a father slides a pen across a table to his own daughter, you have to go back 11 years before that November morning, to the first time he handed me a shoebox and called it a promotion. I was 23. My father, Arturo Reyes, owned a stone and tile fabrication shop off Power Inn Road in Sacramento. He cut countertops, granite, quartz, the occasional slab of marble for a kitchen in the hills that somebody wanted to look like money. The shop was called Reyes Surfaces, and it had my last name on the sign. And I loved that sign, the way you love things before you understand what they cost you. One Saturday, he set a shoebox of receipts on the table in front of me, crumpled invoices, a checkbook, a coffee-stained calendar, and he said, "You are good with numbers, Mija. From now on, you keep the books. Family doesn't clock out." I heard the second sentence as pride. It took me 11 years to hear it as offense. So I kept the books. Not for a summer, for over a decade. I reconciled his accounts on Sunday nights after my own work week. I chased the customers who did not pay. I filed the payroll taxes that kept the shop legal. I never sent an invoice for myself because you do not invoice family, and every year my father would say the same thing at the same table. You are the steady one. The way you describe a load-bearing wall. If you have ever been called the responsible one, you already know the trap in it. The responsible one is the person they stop worrying about. The responsible one is where they put the weight when there is nowhere else to put it. And they do not notice the wall is cracking, because a wall that is holding up the house does not get to complain. There was another child in that house, and he was allowed to complain. My younger brother, Danny, was 3 years behind me, and the son the whole family orbited. When Danny was 19, my father co-signed a truck for him. When Danny was 22, my father set him up with a corner of the shop and a title, Operations. That meant he answered the phone when he felt like it. When Danny lost $8,000 of shop money on a subcontractor who vanished, my father called it a lesson and never spoke of it again. I found the hole in the books that quarter. I patched it quietly, because that is what the steady one does. That detail matters later. Stay with me. There is a smaller thing from those years that I did not think about again until the winter everything came apart. And I am going to hand it to you now, because it is the seed the whole crime grew from. 9 years before that November morning, My father added my name to a business credit card for the shop. It was a card in the company's name with me listed as an authorized user. So I could buy printer ink and pay the county for permits without bothering him. He said it was for convenience. I signed one form at the bank and never thought about it again. But that single form put my name, my birth date, and my clean credit into a file at a bank my father used for everything. If you have ever let a family member add you to something small, because saying no felt dramatic, an account, a card, a lease, a phone plan. Hear me now. That is the door. It is almost never the big thing they ask you to sign that ruins you. It is the small thing you signed years ago and forgot. Sitting in a drawer, waiting for someone to decide you owe them. I forgot about that card for 9 years. My father did not forget about it for one day. My mother's name was Elena. She was small and exact and afraid of debt, the way some people are afraid of water. She kept her own set of books, not the shop's, the household's, in a green cloth notebook with a cracked spine that she bought at a drugstore before I was born. Every dollar that came into that house, and every dollar that left it, went into that notebook in her tight blue script. Groceries, the gas bill, $20 to the collection. At church, she would sit at the end of the table on the first of the month, with her reading glasses down her nose, and add it all up by hand. And when the columns matched, she would let out a small breath, like a woman setting down something heavy. I used to think it was a nervous habit. I did not understand yet that my mother was the only person in that family who had never once lied about money. Remember the green notebook. It comes back. 8 years before that, November morning, my mother got the first diagnosis. It was slow at the start, a tiredness, a set of tests, a specialist an hour up the freeway in a town I would come to know by its parking structure. She got better. Then, 4 years before that morning, it came back and did not leave. And here is the part that decided everything that followed. When my mother could no longer manage the stairs in the house on Larkspur Way, I sold my own condo, the small one-bedroom I had bought with my own credit, the first thing that had ever been only mine. And I moved back into my childhood bedroom to take care of her. I brought my daughter with me. She was 2. Then, I told myself, it would be a season. I want to be careful here, because this is the part the algorithm wants me to rush, and the part you actually need. For 3 years, I was my mother's nurse. I drove her the 90 miles to the specialist and the 90 miles back, over and over, until I knew every off-ramp by the shape of its shadow. I learned to read her oxygen. I learned which mornings she could eat and which mornings she could only pretend. There was a night in the second winter, a Wednesday in February, when her oxygen dropped, and I drove her to the emergency room at 2 a.m, with my daughter asleep in the back seat, because there was no one else to hold either of them. I sat in that waiting room from 2 a.m. until almost 7, filling out my mother's intake forms from memory, her medications, her history, the insurance numbers I knew better than my own, while my father slept 8 miles away and my brother did not answer his phone. I am not telling you this for sympathy. I am telling you because those forms and the parking receipts and the appointment logs from every one of those 90-mile drives, I kept every single one out of habit, in a shoebox, the way my mother kept everything. I did not know I was building an alibi. I thought I was just the kind of person who keeps the receipt. Remember the shoebox. It comes back on a Thursday. I kept working my real job during the day. I was already an auditor by then, already the woman who found the missing money in other people's companies. and I kept the shop's books at night, and I kept my mother alive in the hours between. My father visited her room like a man visiting a museum. My brother visited less. You are the steady one, my father said. The week I hadn't slept in 4 days, I said, "Thank you." I actually said, "Thank you." If you have ever thanked someone for handing you a weight, comment the word steady. I want to know how many of us learned to be grateful for the load. Now watch what was happening in the other room. While I was in my mother's, the shop was dying. I did not know how badly, because 2 years before that November morning, my father quietly took the books away from me. He said Danny was going to modernize the accounting. Move it to software. Take it off my plate so I could focus on Mom. I was so tired I felt relief. Relief. I handed over the one set of eyes that would have caught what came next. And I thanked him for the mercy. That is not weakness. That is what exhaustion does to a person who has been carrying a family for 11 years. Write that down if you need to hear it. They did not outsmart me. They waited until I was too tired to look. There is a difference, and it is the difference that let me sleep again. Later, here is what they did in the dark, and I am going to tell it to you the way I eventually proved it. One document at a time. Because the proof is the whole point of this story. 2 years before that morning, someone opened a home equity line of credit against the house on Larkspur Way. A home equity line of credit is a loan that uses the house itself as the thing you can lose if the loan is not paid. My father's own credit was too damaged by then to carry it, so the application listed a co-borrower whose credit was spotless, whose name was clean, whose income was steady. Mine. My signature is on that loan. I never signed it. Over the next 18 months, they drew that line down to the last dollar, $140,000, and poured it into a shop that was already sinking. $140,000. That is not a number. That is a paid-off house, turned back into a mortgage, while a woman upstairs was dying in it. That was the first loan. There were 3. Stay with me. This is where it turns. The second was the business note. To keep the shop's doors open, someone took out a business line of credit, a revolving loan a company can borrow against. And the lender wanted a personal guarantor. A personal guarantor is a person who promises that if the business cannot pay, the lender can come after them. Personally, for the whole thing. That guarantor was me. $90,000 of the shop's debt, promised in my name, by a hand that was not my hand. And the third was the one I could not forgive, and did not try to. My mother received a small monthly annuity and a disability check. Money meant to keep her comfortable in the time she had left. It went into a care account with my father as a signer, because someone had to be able to pay her pharmacy. $3,000 a month went into that account. For the last 18 months of her life, $3,000 a month came back out of it, into the shop, into the hole. Into Danny's lessons. Do the arithmetic with me just this once, and then I will never make you do it again. $3,000 a month for 18 months. $54,000. That was every dollar meant to make my mother's dying easier. Spent keeping a failing business alive. A year and a half of her care. Gone somewhere. She never agreed to send it. My mother added her columns by hand at that table every month, and could not understand why. The account was always short. I found her once, near the end, going over the same page 3 times, with her glasses fogging. And she looked up at me and said, "Mija, I think I am making mistakes now." She was not making mistakes. She was the only one in the house who wasn't, but I did not know that yet, so I told her it was fine. and I kissed her head, and I let her believe the numbers were failing instead of the family. I will carry that. Not as guilt, as fuel. My mother died on a Tuesday. At the end of last September, she died in the bedroom. I had moved home to keep her in, with my hand on her chest, and my daughter's drawing taped to the wall where she could see it. She weighed almost nothing. The last coherent thing she said to me was not profound. She asked if I had remembered to write down the $12 she'd sent to church that Sunday. I said I would. That night, after the funeral home came, I found the green notebook on her nightstand, and I wrote it in for her, $12, tithe, in my handwriting, under her last entry. I did not know I had just written the first line of the case that would take my whole family apart. I closed the notebook and put it in my bag, and I did not open it again for 6 weeks. Now, the ally. Because no one gets out of a house like that alone. Across the street from Larkspur Way lived my mother's older sister. I called her Tia Rosa. She was 71, widowed, and for 30 years she had worked in the county recorder's office, the place where deeds and liens and every official mark a house can carry are written down and kept. Rosa knew paper. Rosa knew that paper is where families keep their real feelings, the ones they will not say out loud. She had loved my mother, and she had watched that house for years, the way you watch a stove you don't trust. And she had never once, in all the noise, said a bad word about my father to me. She just showed up. She sat with my mother on the afternoons I had to work. She brought soup in a jar and took the jar home to wash it and brought it back full. And after the funeral, when the house on Larkspur Way went strangely, efficiently quiet, Tua Rosa started leaving her porch light on at night, facing my window without ever telling me why. 6 weeks after my mother died, the second Sunday of last November, I found out why the house had gone so quiet. That is the morning I told you about at the start. That is the morning of the pen. I have to give you the timeline of that morning precisely, because it is the only way you will believe that I was not saved by luck. I do not believe in the lucky accident, and neither should you. Everything that saved me, I had already built. I just didn't know I'd built it yet. At 6:30 that morning, my phone lit up and trembled against the nightstand, with an alert I had set up years earlier for my own protection. I am a fraud examiner. I keep a monitor on my own credit, the way a locksmith keeps good locks on his own door. The alert said a new inquiry had posted to my credit file, and a line of credit I did not recognize had changed status. Sitting on the edge of my childhood bed at 6:30 in the morning, still half in a dream about my mother, I pulled my full credit report on my phone, and the fog went out of me all at once. There were accounts on it I had never opened. There was a home against my name I had never borrowed against. I sat very still, and I did the one thing my training had taught me to do before anything else. I did not call anyone. I did not confront anyone. I took 12 screenshots, and I emailed them to myself, and I wrote down the time, 6:41 a.m. At 8 o'clock, my father asked me to come down to the kitchen. He was calm. He had made coffee. Danny was there, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed, wearing the face he wore when a decision had already been made in a room I wasn't in, and on the table was a document, 14 pages, stapled, with a cover sheet printed in color, which is how you know a man wants a thing to look official. The header said, family settlement and mutual release. My father slid it across the table and he slid the pen on top of it. And he said the thing he had been saying my whole life. Sign it, Naomi. Family doesn't clock out. If that alert had not fired 90 minutes earlier, I might have signed it. I want to be honest with you about that, because I think the honesty is the whole gift of telling you this at all. I was grieving. I was exhausted in a way that 11 years builds. Not a week. I trusted the table I'd grown up at more than I trusted my own eyes. But I had read that document with a fraud examiner's brain instead of a daughter's heart, because the phone had already told me the truth. And so I read what it actually was instead of what it pretended to be. It was a release. In plain words, buried in 14 pages of soft language about healing and moving forward as a family. That document asked me to do 3 things. To acknowledge the loans as valid. To waive any claim I might ever bring against my father or my brother regarding financial matters of the household. And to quit claim. To give up my interest in the house on Larkspur Way. In other words, they had forged my name onto their debts. And now they were asking me to sign a paper that would make the forgery mine forever. Dressed up as peace. Sign here. Mija. And the crime becomes a favor you did us. I want you to see the room. Because I still see it every time I close my eyes. The coffee my father made and did not offer me. My brother against the counter, not meeting my eyes, studying the floor the way he studied it the day the $8,000 went missing. My daughter at the far end of the table with a coloring book, humming, 6 years old. Close enough to hear every word, and too young to know which ones had teeth. The 14 pages were warm from the printer. The staple was still hot when I picked it up. They had color printed my piece offering minutes before I came downstairs, which is exactly how I knew the kindness in it was a costume. Someone had pulled on in a hurry. My mother had been dead 6 weeks. The soil on her grave had not settled, and they had printed a document in color to turn her stolen care fund into a debt with my name at the bottom of it. I set the pen down. I did not raise my voice. Restraint is not the same as weakness, and I need you to see the difference in what I did next, because it is the difference between this story and the story they wanted me to have. I said, I need to think about it. My father smiled, because he had heard that as almost yes. My mother taught me one useful thing about that man, without ever meaning to. He could not tell the difference between a woman agreeing and a woman deciding. I went upstairs. I packed one duffel bag, my daughter's clothes and my own, her drawing off the wall, my laptop, and the green notebook. I took my daughter's hand, and I walked out the side door onto the driveway, and I heard the house door meet its frame behind me, gently, without a sound. And that softness was the worst part. Worse than any shout, because it meant no one inside had even stood up. I had nowhere to go. I knew exactly where to go. Tia Rosa's porch light was on across the street, the way it had been every night for 6 weeks. She opened her door. Before I reached the second step, she did not ask what happened. She looked at my face, and she looked at my daughter, and she looked at the one bag, and she stepped aside to let us in. She had a couch made up already. She'd had it made up for weeks. You came when nobody was watching. All those years, she said, taking the bag out of my hand. You showed up when there was no one there to see it. That is not weakness, Mija. That is the only proof of love that counts. Now, sit down. We're going to write everything down while it is fresh. And she went to a drawer and took out a yellow legal pad and a pen. And she wrote the date across the top, and under it she wrote the time. And under that she began to take my statement, in a retired county clerk's steady block letters, the way she had written down other people's truths for 30 years. That is the moment the story turns from something that happened to me into something I did. If your chest is tight right now, comment the word steady one more time and let it go there. You have carried it long enough. Let me carry the rest of this for a while. That first night on Rosa's couch, I made a decision I want to explain, because it is the decision the whole rest of this depends on. And it is the opposite of what most people expect from a story like this. I did not call my father to scream. I did not post anything. I did not drive back. Across the street, I opened my laptop and I opened a new case file, the same kind of case file I open at work. And at the top, I typed a name I had never expected to type, Reyes. And then I did what I do. I built it. Here is what I understood that first night that most people in my position do not understand. And it is the only advantage I had. A forged signature is not the end of a fraud. It is the beginning of a paper trail. To put my name on that home loan, someone had to walk it through a system with rules, and every rule they broke left a mark. And I read marks for a living. They thought my competence was something they could borrow. They never once considered it was something I could turn around. I gave myself 3 things to prove, and I gave each of them a name so I would not confuse them at 2 in the morning. The house loan, the business note, Mama's account. 3 threads. I promised myself I would not pull any of them until I could pull all 3 at once, because a fraud examiner never shows her hand on the first thread. You wait until the whole rope is in your fist. Let me walk you through how each one came apart. One document at a time, because this is the part I owe you. The house loan came apart because of a stamp. When a home equity loan gets signed, the signatures have to be notarized. A notary public watches you sign and presses a stamp onto the page. A small inked seal that is supposed to prove one simple thing: that you were really in the room. On that date, with a pen in your hand, it is the little seal that says she was here. I ordered a certified copy of my own loan file, which I had every legal right to do, because my name was on it. And there it was. My signature I did not write, and beneath it, a notary stamp certifying that I had appeared in person in a strip mall office in Rancho Cordova on a Thursday afternoon, 2 years earlier. I remembered that Thursday. I will remember it until I die, because on that exact Thursday afternoon, I was 90 miles away, in a specialist's waiting room, holding my mother's coat while she had a scan, and I could prove it. Not with my word, but with the hospital's own records. The appointment log, the parking receipt I had kept in a shoebox, the way my mother kept everything. Because I am my mother's daughter and I write it all down, a stamp meant to prove I was in one room was the exact thing that proved I was in another. Stay with that. The lie that was supposed to bury me was the one clean lie in the whole pile. And clean lies are the easiest ones to catch. But I did not stop there. Because a good case does not rest on one leg. I pulled the notary's public commission record. Every notary's history is public, kept on file by the state. And I found the second crack. The commission number on that stamp had expired 8 months before the date it certified. The person who had witnessed my signature had not been a valid notary on the day they claimed to witness it, so now I had 2 independent proofs that the notarization was false. I was not there, and neither, officially, was the notary. 2 legs. The table stands. That was thread 1. Now, the business note. The business note came apart because of an email address. When the shop's line of credit was set up, the online application listed a contact email for the guarantor. For me, it was not my email. It was a variation of my name at a free mail service. One letter off from anything I would ever use. The kind of thing someone sets up so the lender's confirmations go somewhere. The real person will never see them. I did not have to guess whose it was. It had been used months earlier to register a warranty on a truck, Danny's truck. My brother had built a mailbox in my name so that a $90,000 promise could be made in my voice without my ears ever hearing it. That is not a lesson, Danny. That is a felony with your fingerprints on the keyboard. And then Mama's account. Mama's account came apart because of the green notebook. I need you to understand what that notebook actually was, because I did not understand it myself until I finally opened it. 6 weeks after she died. At Tita Rosa's kitchen table, at 1 a.m, my mother, in her fear of debt, had written down every single dollar that moved through that house for 40 years, including the care account. Every month, in her tight blue script, she recorded what the annuity and the disability check should have added up to. And then, in a shakier hand near the end, what the balance actually was. The gap between those two columns, month after month, was the theft, recorded in real time, by the victim, who thought she was the one making the mistake. $54,000, subtracted $3,000 at a time, documented by the woman it was stolen from, in a drugstore notebook she had kept since before I was born. My mother spent the last year of her life keeping the only honest set of books in that family. And she never knew it. She thought her mind was failing. It was the family that was failing, and she caught it, and she filed it. In blue ink, without ever understanding what she had done. I sat at Rosa's table, and I read her columns until the sky went gray. And then I went out to my car in the dark so I would not wake my daughter. And I put my forehead on the steering wheel. And I cried. Once, the only time in all of this. For a woman who added her numbers 3 times because she trusted her family more than she trusted her own hands, that is the single time I let it out. I have not cried about them since. And I am not going to. There is nothing left in me that they get to make wet. When the sun came up, I stopped crying, and I did what my mother's notebook had taught me to do. I wrote it all down. By the 2nd week of December, I had my file. I want to lay it out for you the way I laid it out for the professionals, because the order is the whole point. I never had to break a single rule, and that is what made it unbreakable. Everything I did, any victim can do. That is why they could not fight it. You cannot fight a woman for using the exact system you tried to hide inside of. First, I filed a police report. Identity theft and forgery are crimes you report, and a case number is the thing that turns a private wound into a public record. Second, I filed a sworn identity theft affidavit, a legal document where the victim states, under penalty of perjury, which accounts were opened without them. Under penalty of perjury. That phrase matters, because it is the thing my father was counting on, me being too tired, or too loyal, to sign. Third, I sent each lender a formal notice of fraud with my report attached, which by law forces the lender to open its own investigation and to freeze the accounts while it looks. Fourth, through a lawyer, I retained a forensic document examiner, a specialist who compares signatures and testifies to whether a hand wrote a name. She took 40 real samples of my signature and the 3 forged ones, and her report said, in the flat language those reports use, that the question signatures were Not authored by the reference writer. Not authored by me. Cold. Clean. True. I did not confront my father. I did not need to. I let the paperwork walk across the street, on its own legs. Before I tell you what the paperwork did when it arrived, I have to tell you about the day it almost went sideways. Because I promised you no lucky accidents, and that means I owe you the hard part too. In early January, my brother figured out that something was moving. Not the whole shape of it, just that I had not signed, had not come back, had not broken. And Danny did what Danny always did. When a decision had already been made in a room I wasn't in, he tried to get ahead of it. He sent a message to the family group chat. The one my mother had made years ago, still named for her, because no one had the heart to change it. And he wrote a soft, sad paragraph about how grief had made me paranoid. How I had walked out on the family, the week of Mom's death. How everyone should be patient with me and not believe anything I said about money. My aunt, on my father's side, answered with a praying hands, and thinking of you all. Tua Rosa, who was in that chat, did not answer. She screenshotted it, and she sent it to me. And she wrote underneath, in her clerk's shorthand, saved and dated, "Do not let anyone tell you. The quiet ones are not paying attention." And then Danny made the mistake that people make when they are guilty and afraid. 2 days later, at 11:47 in the morning, he sent a message to the group chat that he meant to send to my father. It said, "She can't prove anything. The notary stuff is buried. Just get her to sign, and this all goes away." 3 seconds later, wrong chat. 8 seconds after that, ignore that everyone. My aunt typed and stopped typing 3 times. Tua Rosa had the screenshot before I had even reached for my phone. She slid it across her kitchen table to me the next morning with 2 fingers, the way you slide something you don't want to touch for too long. And she said, "Your brother just notarized the whole thing himself." I did not gloat. I added it to the file, time-stamped, and I moved on, because a fraud examiner does not celebrate a confession. She logs it. But I will admit to you, and only you, that I read the notary stuff is buried about 4 times, and each time it got easier to breathe. By the middle of January, my father understood that a paper had left my hands and walked into a system he could not charm. So he did the thing frightened people with money do. He hired a lawyer, a decent one, from a small firm out in the suburbs that mostly handles wills and family businesses. The kind of attorney you bring, not because you expect to win on the facts, but because you are hoping the other side will not show up with theirs. His lawyer sent my lawyer a request for a meeting, a settlement conference. They called it, to resolve this privately, as a family, before it goes any further. I almost said no. Then I decided I would go once, not to negotiate, but to say one thing to my father's face, on the record, in a room with witnesses, and then never speak to him again. There is a kind of ending that only counts if you deliver it in person. I wanted that one clean. We met on a Tuesday, in a conference room downtown. My lawyer sat beside me. Across the table were my father, his lawyer, and, for the first time since the driveway, my brother, who would not look at me. My father wore the navy suit he wears to funerals. He had worn it to my mother's, 6 weeks before he tried to make me sign for the money he took from her. His lawyer slid a document across the table, printed in color again, because that family cannot help itself. Titled Family Restoration Agreement. It offered to let me walk away clean if I signed a release, agreed to family mediation, and said nothing to anyone. Ever. It was the same document from the kitchen table, wearing a nicer coat. My lawyer picked it up, did not read it, and slid it to one side. My father tried the voice then. The reasonable one. The one he used right before he took something. Naomi, please. We are your family. We were only trying to keep the business alive. For all of us. I did not say the thing I was thinking, which was that a dying woman's care fund is not the business. I had not said one word since I walked in. I let the silence do what silence does to guilty people, which is make them fill it. My father filled it. He talked about hard years and hard choices, about how I had always been the strong one, the steady one, and how the strong one understands. When he finished, I opened the folder in front of me. I laid one hand flat on it, and I spoke for the first time, and my voice came out steadier than I expected, and I have my mother to thank for that. I did not raise it once. I need you to hear that, because it is the whole difference between what I did and what they were braced for. I said, I did not come here to be asked to understand. I looked at my father. I did not come here for the apology you did not bring. I looked at my brother. I did not come here to mediate a choice you made. While our mother's grave was still fresh, I looked at their lawyer, who had clearly not known the half of what he had been hired for, and whose face was slowly telling me so. I said, I am not signing the document on the table. I am not signing anything ever again with my name anywhere near yours. Then I took my hand off the folder, and I laid it out in 3 numbers. The way I would lay out any case. Number 1. The forged signature on the house loan is now a police report with a case number, and a forensic examiner has already put in writing that the hand on that page is not mine. Number 2. The notary who swore I stood in an office in Rancho Cordova. On a Thursday I spent 90 miles away, holding my mother's coat, had a commission that expired 8 months before that date, and I have the hospital's own records for where I actually was. Number 3. Our mother wrote down every dollar you took from her care, by hand, in a green notebook, while she was dying and thought her mind was failing. And it wasn't. I have the notebook. I will not be asking you to understand any of it. The district attorney can ask you. I stood up. My father did not look at me again. He looked at the table, at the color-printed folder, at his own hands, and in that one small thing. A man who had never in my life failed to have a quick answer, sitting silent, studying his hands the way my brother studies floors. I understood that I had stopped being someone he needed to convince. I had become something he needed to survive. I picked my mother's notebook up off the table, and I walked out, and I did not pull the door hard behind me, because he had taught me a long time ago that the quietest doors are the ones that end things. That was the last time I stood in a room with my father. It was the only reckoning I ever wanted. It lasted 9 minutes. No one raised their voice, and it was the loudest thing I have ever done. Now stow how what the paperwork did when it arrived. The credit union that held the house loan and the business note has a fraud department, and fraud departments are not sentimental. They do not care that the forger is somebody's father. They care about one question. Was this loan obtained by fraud? Yes or no? I had handed them a police report, a sworn affidavit, a forensic examiner's finding, an expired notary commission, hospital records placing me 90 miles away, a fake email address traced to my brother's own truck warranty, and a screenshot in which the guarantor's own brother wrote the notary stuff is buried. The answer to their one question was not close. In late February, the credit union made its finding, And here's where restraint stops and the verdict lands. So let me give it to you plainly. Without a single word, you would need a lawyer to understand. Because you have earned the clean version. They took my name off the house loan. All $140,000 of it. No longer my debt, no longer my risk. Gone from my file as if I had never been there. Because I never had been. And the debt did not evaporate. A forged loan does not disappear. It gets reassigned to the people who actually made it. The lender pursued. The real borrowers. That was my father and my brother, whose information was all over the true parts of the application, whose bank account had received the money, whose business had spent it. $140,000 that they had spent 2 years hiding behind my clean name landed back on the two of them. In full, with their own names on it this time, in a courtroom, instead of a kitchen. That was the first consequence. There were 3, and I told you I would make them visible. The second, the business note. Once my guarantee was voided as a forgery, the $90,000 line no longer had the clean cosigner that had made the lender comfortable. And the lender called it, demanded it back at once. The shop could not pay. Reyes Surfaces, the sign I had loved at 23, closed in the spring. The saws were sold at auction to a competitor. 2 exits down the freeway. My father, who had not worked for anyone but himself in 30 years, took a job cutting stone for the man who bought his equipment, 63 years old. On someone else's clock. Family doesn't clock out. He used to tell me, it turns out, it does. It just took him 30 years. And a daughter he underestimated to punch the card. The third consequence is the one I want you to feel, because it is the one my mother earned. Without knowing, Mama's account, the $54,000 drained from a dying woman's care fund, is not just theft. When the victim is elderly and dependent, the law has a specific name for it. Elder financial abuse. My mother's green notebook, the column she added 3 times because she thought her mind was going, became the timeline the district attorney's office used. Dollar for dollar, month by month. My mother caught the crime while it was happening and filed the evidence in blue ink. And a year after her death, that evidence walked into a courtroom on its own 2 feet. The notary lost their commission. My brother took a plea. My father is answering to the state for money he took from the woman he was supposed to bury. With dignity, I did not put a word of feeling into any of it. I did not have to. The facts were louder than anything. I could have screamed. They reacted. Of course. This is the part where the anger you have been holding gets to breathe. So breathe. When the credit union's finding came down, my father called me 11 times in 2 days. I did not answer. He left a voicemail in the reasonable voice, the one he used right before he took something from you. Naomi, this doesn't have to be legal. We can fix this as a family. I did not call back. He sent my Anne across town to Rosa's door as an emissary. And Rosa met her on the porch and did not let her past the step. He mailed a card, a grocery store sympathy card, of all things, with a $20 bill inside, and the words thinking of you, and the little one, in his handwriting. And no apology. Because there was no apology in him. Only a bill he hadn't figured out how to make mine. I returned the card unopened. I did not return the $20. I gave it to Tudier Rosa, who gave it to the food bank at her parish, and I wrote it down in the green notebook. In my own hand. Under my mother's last line, $20. Given away. It felt like the first honest entry in that account. In years, my brother sent one text. In April, it said, I know I have a lot to explain. He did not apologize. He did not ask about my daughter. He did not say my mother's name. I have not answered it. I do not know if I ever will. Some messages you leave on read not out of cruelty, but because a reply would be a lie. And I have decided I am done lying to that family to keep the furniture from shaking. Before I tell you how it ends, I have to say one thing. Because if you have made it this far, you already know the shape of it. There is no version of this where I walk back into that house. Not for an apology, not for a holiday, not for the version of my father who is 63 and cutting stone for a stranger. And maybe, somewhere, some doors do not need to be forced shut. They just need to stay closed, and mine is closed. And the quiet on the other side of it is the first quiet I have owned in 11 years. If you have had to close a door like that, tell me in the comments. Not to argue, just so we can count each other. There are more of us than that kind of family wants to admit. And I read every single one. Subscribe if you want the next story. Because I am not the only one who kept the books in silence. And I am not done telling ours. In May, my daughter and I moved into a small house of our own in Oak Park, on a street where the recycling goes out on Wednesdays, and the neighbor 2 doors down grows tomatoes. He will not stop giving away. It has 2 bedrooms and a lemon tree that was here before us, and a kitchen with a window that gets the morning light. I paid for it with my own money, on my own credit. The credit I spent the winter proving was mine. The credit they had treated like a thing they could borrow without asking. For the first time in my adult life, no one in the world can hand me a document at my own kitchen table and tell me I owe them my signature. I hung one photograph in the living room. It is my mother at the end of the table on the 1st of some month years ago, reading glasses down her nose, adding her columns, caught mid-count without knowing anyone was looking. That is how I want to remember her. Not sick, not fooled. But exactly, quietly right about the only thing she ever kept score on. Under the photograph, on a shelf, sits the green notebook. I did not put it away in a box. I use it. On the 1st of every month, I sit at my own table, in my mother's spot, and I add my own columns by hand. What came in? What went out? $12 to the collection, tomatoes from the neighbor, a lemon tree that needed nothing from me but attention, and when the numbers match, I let out the small breath she used to let out. And I understand it now. It was never a nervous habit. It was a woman making sure, one more time, that no one could tell her a lie about her own life. That is what those books always were, not the record of what she owed, the record of what was true. My daughter turned 7 in the new house. Tia Rosa came, and the neighbor with the tomatoes came. And 2 of my mother's church friends came. And my forensic document examiner came, in jeans, with a wrapped board book, because somewhere in the middle of a case she had become a friend. Danny did not come. My father did not come. No one who threw us out came. And that is not a wound anymore. That is the guest list I would have chosen. Rosa stood in my new kitchen with a glass of lemonade and looked around at the small, loud, ordinary room. And she said, "This is the family that came, Mija, the ones who showed up when there was nobody to see it. Remember their faces?" And I did. I do. The last thing. My father called my old profession something borrowed. You are good with numbers. Keep the books. Family doesn't clock out. He thought he was fencing me in. He never understood that he was training me. 11 years reading his ledgers taught me exactly how to read the ones he faked. He was right about one thing, and I will give it to him, because it is the only thing he ever gave me that turned out to be true. Family doesn't clock out. It doesn't. That is why, when they were sure I had finally bent, I was already at the table with the light coming in, adding up the columns, making the numbers match. The steady one never stopped keeping the books. They just never asked. Twos. If this story reached you, leave the word steady below and tell me about the door you had to close. I read every comment. And if you have ever been the one who came when nobody was watching, this channel is for you. Subscribe, and I'll tell you the next one.